Hello, you're all very welcome to this session of the Teagasc National Beef Conference, which took place on Tuesday, the 19th of November. Today's presentation is titled The Impact of Red and White Clover on Animal Performance in Suckler Calf to Beef Production Systems, and is given by Peter Doyle, who is a research officer in Teagasc Grange. You can turn your camera on there, Peter, as well, yeah. So full proceedings for all 6 papers at the Beef Conference are available on the Teagasc website, and I'll say more about that later on. So, Peter is a research officer based in Teagasc Grange. One of his main research roles is focused on improving the efficiency of suckler calf to beef systems through the use of clover and animal genetics. His research also includes meat quality, enteric methane production, nitrogen use efficiency, cattle grazing behavior and intake of pasture, herbage quality, and modelling the cost of feedstuff for feed systems. He received a PhD from UCD for his research on forage-only beef systems and was awarded the Teagasc Walsh Scholar of the Year in 2021. Peter is also from a suckler and beef and tillage farm in County Wexford. You're very welcome, Peter, and thanks for coming on.
Yes.
Okay, right. So, Peter, the format is we'll ask you to share your presentation. You give your presentation, which is 20-25 minutes, and then we'll take some questions at the end of it.
Thanks for having me here today to talk about the impact of red and white clover on animal performance in suckler calf to beef production systems. So I'd like to thank Peter Bennett, who is the Walsh Scholar on this project, I suppose, doing a lot of the measurements on the ground and writing up the data, as well as thanking Michael O'Donovan, Nicky Byrne, Paul Crossan and Mark McGee. So when we look at the challenges and opportunities in Irish beef systems, controlling costs are a challenge, and the largest direct costs on suckler beef farms are machinery and contracting costs associated with making silage, handling slurry, feeding out to feed, as well as purchasing your feed and purchasing your fertilizer. So the steps I suppose we're looking at as well is the environmental sustainability, and the signposts have very key 12 steps that are there, how to improve your environmental sustainability. But within those steps, probably the main ones I'm looking at today is reducing your fertilizer, reducing your slaughter age, and incorporating clover onto the farm. So like we know that by incorporating red and white clover onto the farm, we can certainly reduce our dependence on fertilizer and nitrogen. But I suppose from a suckler calf to beef context, we're not quite sure is the effect of clover on animal performance, live weight gain, and reduces the age to slaughter. So that's, I suppose, a key component that we're looking at for this presentation. But I suppose it is important to understand our feed costs. And I suppose here in this, what we have here is the cost of feed expressed against the relative cost of grazed grass per energy utilised. And in this graph, you can view it whether a land charge of €250 per acre is included in the orange bars, or whether you don't include a land charge, which is the green bars. You can see if you include your land charge, our winter forages are about 3 times more expensive than grazed grass. But looking within our grazed grass component, we can see that grass white clover is now cheaper than grazed grass with a reduced fertilizer dependence. And looking within our winter forage systems, we can see that our 2-cut grass silage pit system is quite a similar cost to a 3-cut red clover silage system, which may come as a shock to some. And we can see the cost of beef nuts are a little bit more expensive than those. But I suppose going back to our clover context, I suppose we looked at clover experiments in the Derrypatrick herd. So the Derrypatrick herd is a spring calving suckler calf to beef system. It has 80 cows of one breed, and the stocking rate is 170 kilos of organic N to the hectare. So it's not in nitrates derogation, but it's on the verge of it. And I suppose it still will be seen as a relatively highly stocked system for beef systems. And so the clover experiments we looked at in the Derrypatrick herd included evaluating the role of clover and suckler calf beef performance from 12 months of age to finish over 1 grazing season. So that's experiment 1. And then we also looked at the role of clover on suckler beef cattle performance from birth to finish. So that's in experiment 2. So going to experiment 1, our objective was to quantify that carcass gain response of suckler bred yearling cattle grazing that grass white clover versus grass only pastures over 1 grazing season. And you'll see for the rest of this presentation, when I have things highlighted in red, that's a grass white clover system, and any bars indicated in blue will be a grass only system. So for our experimental design for the first experiment, our spring-born progeny, steers and heifers, and we had Simmental, Angus, Charolais and Limousin sires. And all of these animals, they're on a common diet up to 12 months of age. So they're on grazed grass over the first grazing season and grass silage over the first winter. And at the end of that first winter, at 12 months of age, before they went out for the second grazing season, half the steers and heifers were a grass-only system, and the other half of steers and heifers were assigned to a grass white clover system. And all of these animals were grazing from 12 months of age to 19 or 20 months of age, and were finished from pasture with no concentrates, excuse me, at the end of that grazing season. So that would help us quantify that carcass gain response from grass by clover sward. So if we look at the live weight gain during the grazing season, so we have our grass-only heifers in the dotted blue line, like their live weight. Then we have the grass clover heifers, the dotted red line. We have our grass-only steers in the solid blue and the grass clover steers in the solid red. And what we've seen at the start of the grazing season, halfway through, there wasn't a huge difference in live weight performance. But as the grazing season progressed and more clover content came into the sward, we're getting much higher live weight gains on those grass clover systems. And by the end of that grazing season, there's an extra 23 kilos live weight gain at pasture for those grass white clover compared to grass only cattle. So it is a very positive result to see. And I suppose in this table here, if we look at this orange bar to the right, that shows you the relative differences between pasture treatments. And we've seen that those grass clover animals, they had an extra 0.1 kilos per day on that grass clover system. And in the end, we ended up getting a 14 kilo heavier carcass weight for those grass clover animals. So at a good beef price today, that's a significant amount of money. But I suppose what we've seen when we used those the genetics and animals we had in our system, we were probably I suppose getting good weight for age on the animals in terms of our 600 kilos at 19 to 20 months of age. But we can see we are only getting a fat score of 2 equals on those animals, so they weren't fit for slaughter. So we would like to, I suppose, certainly it's something you have to improve on. And with our heifers, we probably were, it's a little bit easier to get that fat cover on them at that young ages. If we look at the economic environmental sustainability, so Paul Crossan would have done the economic modelling in the context of a suckler calf to beef system, looking at where white clover was included for those steer and heifer systems. And we can see that there was a €93 higher net margin per hectare on that grass clover system compared to the grass only system. And if we look at our greenhouse gas emissions, there's a 6% lower greenhouse gas emissions per kilo of carcass weight for that grass clover system. Or if you wanted to express it on a suckler cow unit basis, is about 3% lower greenhouse gas emissions. So look, again, it's all very positive. The different point that incorporating that white clover into the sward, it increased the live weight gain in the yearling cattle, it reduced the fertilizer nitrogen, and improved our profit and reduced our emissions. But I suppose you have to ask the question from this experiment, I suppose, what happens if we had clover introduced earlier in life? It was only introduced at 12 months of age. In this experiment, so we want to look at what happens if we do it from birth. And I suppose we also have to see that can we improve that carcass weight and the fat deposition on those animals from pasture at 19 months of age. So that's why we went and we set up our second experiment. So I suppose the objectives of this experiment was to evaluate the performance of suckler cattle on a grass only compared to a grass clover based production system, but this time it's from birth to finish. So you have your first grazing season on clover, your first winter, and back out for your second grazing season. So we had a similar suckler calf to beef system at a similar stocking rate as the last study, and we're looking at 3 production cycles. So to date, we've only 1 production cycle fully completed, with the second one ongoing. So look, results may change over time as more production cycle results will come on board over the years, but we're just presenting the first production cycle today. So our objectives were to develop that low nitrogen system with high clover, and we wanted to have a young finishing age and a low concentrate input to see what is possible to achieve within these systems and provide a guidance out there to farmers. So our pasture treatments, we had grass only versus a grass clover system. We spread 120 units of nitrogen to the acre on our grass only system and 60 units of nitrogen to the acre on our grass clover system. We also had a sire breed comparison included. So we have one cow type and we've either an Aberdeen Angus or a Charolais sire being used on those cows. But we won't be discussing the results of that today because we need to have more, I suppose, animals used up in the system before we can compare breed types. But however, it is important to see how we selected our AI sires to complement the system that we are operating. So we selected our Angus and Charolais AI sires under specific selection criteria to improve that carcass weight for age and early finishing ability, as we can see from the last experiment that we're struggling to get that, I suppose, sufficient finish on those animals. So obviously we picked an easy calving bull, and after that we picked a bull that would be 5-star for carcass weight, so they'd have good weight for age. We also picked 4 and 5 stars bulls for that early slaughter age. And we also looked at carcass fat, so that's also on a scale of 1 to 5 stars. And it's the opposite of what you think. So 5-star for fat means they're lean, and 1-star for fat means they're more fat and fleshy. So we want to try to get that fat cover on them off grass at a younger age. So we picked 1 and 2 stars for carcass fat to improve that fleshing ability, but you do hit a little bit on confirmation when selecting for that earlier fleshing ability. So an example of the Charolais bulls we use, it's all in the conference proceedings booklet, but we did use Gold Star Ludwig, First, Whitecliffe, Orwell, Hamill. There are just a few of them, for example. And like examples for the Angus would be Bunlahi John G, Tree Bridge Powsey, Carmen Mateo. So they're all very good terminal index bulls. So I suppose maybe going back though for the rest of our presentation, just looking at the pasture treatments. So we had the progeny and they're either signed to a grass system for life or a grass clover system for life. So within our grass only system, the calves are born in March and they're signed to a grass only sward with the cow. Then in October they're weaned, and after weaning in around November time, they'll come in for the first winter and run grass silage plus 1.5 kilos of meal. And at 12 months of age or 13 months of age, they're turned out in March, April, and they graze at grass only sward. And they graze that up until about 19, 20 months of age, and they're finished in October. Whereas in comparison to that, in our grass clover system, the calves are born and are with the cow on a grass white clover pasture over that first grazing season. Then after weaning, the calves come in November and they're on a grass red clover silage diet plus 1.5 kilos of concentrates. And when they're turned back out to grass at 12 months of age, they now go onto a grass white clover system. So it's white clover for life, grass only for life. And all the animals, steers, heifers, Angus and Charolais, were all killed the same day in October at 19 months of age. So if we look at our grazing management, look, on average, we're grazing a herbage mass of 1,800 to about 5.3 centimeters of a post height. And we had an average clover content of 22%. So you can see that clover content, it's generally quite low in the springtime, and it increases as the year progresses, and that's where we start to get more, I suppose, nitrogen fixation and response to animal live weight gain as the clover content increases throughout the year. So looking at our silage yields, we had 3-cut silage system on 16% of the farm area, where we wanted to compare that 3-cut grass silage versus a 3-cut red clover silage. And within that, we were able to see that, I suppose, here up in the yields that they're looking at, that grass red clover did have a 3-cut yield that was higher than the grass only system. And we didn't spread any fertilizer nitrogen on that grass red clover system, whereas comparison our grass only system got 234 kilos of nitrogen to the hectare. However, it is important that a P and K is applied to that grass red clover system. It has a high P and K requirement due to that high yield for silage. So we did apply cattle slurry to both of those systems. And in 2024, we didn't see any difference in yield between the grass only and grass red clover systems. And I suppose an important thing that is important to point out is the red clover proportions. They're different for the first, second, and third cuts. So you can see you have a fairly low clover content of 15% for your first cut. That increases for the second cut, and up to your third cut, you're talking nearly 90% clover in that grass red clover pasture. That's in 2023. And in 2024, we've seen quite a similar red clover content. So for that first cut silage, because the red clover content is quite low, it's pretty much almost like a grass silage crop. So I suppose preliminary results from Nicky Byrne's work would nearly suggest that there's not much difference in performance for grass silage versus grass red clover silage in first cut, but it's more so your second and third cuts that you're starting to see those differences in performance, because you have much more clover in those cuts. And a key thing probably just to be careful of, if you are grazing your red clover in the back end of the year, you can still have a very high clover content, so you just have to follow the correct management strategies, I suppose, to prevent bloat. So now we will look at the herbage production over the whole farm, which includes the grazing and the silage ground. So in 2023, both the grass awning and grass clover systems were estimated to grow 12 tonnes of dry matter per hectare, but there is only half the amount of fertilizer spread on that grass clover system. And if we look at our nitrogen fertilizer strategy for our white clover, we can see the grass only system receives 150, and our grass white clover, we're applying our nitrogen in the spring because there's not much nitrogen fixation occurring, but then we're cutting back on that nitrogen during the summer and late summer period. So now, I suppose, looking at the suckler cow performance results across pasture type, there was no difference in body condition score between grass awning and grass clover cows. But with the live weight, we can see those grass clover cows had an 18.5 kilo heavier live weight gain from calving to weaning compared to grass only cows. Milk yield, we didn't measure that yet, but Sarah Armstrong will be measuring that in 2025 as part of her PhD. I suppose this is probably one of the most important graphs that we're going to look at today. So this is tracking the progeny live weight all the way from birth through to finish. So the red bars is the live weight of a grass clover, and the blue bars is the live weight of a grass only. So up until weaning, we can see that time weaning occurred, the calves that were on the grass white clover pastures were 10 kilos heavier in October than those on the grass only pastures. And then after weaning, they're still at pasture up until November, and by the time they're housed, there's a 13 kilo difference in live weight in favor of the grass clover animals. And then after I suppose housing those, or at housing I should say, those grass clover animals, they went on to red clover silage over the winter, and the grass only animals went on to a grass silage over that first winter. So it was a 150-day winter, and what we seen was that those animals on the red clover had a further increase in live weight gain on that red clover silage, to the point that there's another 13 kilos gained on the red clover silage. So by the time they were turned out in April, it was a real wet spring that year, so we were late turned out, but there's a 27 kilo live weight benefit in favor of those grass clover animals. And when they're out at that second grazing season here, the grass clover animals are on white clover swards, and the grass only animals are on grass only swards, and that difference maintained in live weight, and that finishing at the end of the grazing season, there's still that 27 kilo live weight benefit. So if we look at the average daily gains, look, we got very good at average daily gains in those calves, getting up to 1.3 kilos per day on those male calves. And as you can see, you had that live weight benefit on that grass clover system. And then for the first winter, as I said, we got that average daily gain benefit on the red clover silage as a first and second cut silage that were mainly feeding to those wheelings. But over the second grazing season, there was no difference in average daily gain. So I suppose the main thing to look at is that we see if you had that 27 kilo difference in live weight at the end of the grazing season, that resulted in an 18 kilo heavier carcass weight. So that's, look, it's a very positive result. And if you put that at a €5 per kilo base for kilo carcass, that was worth €113 more per animal for just grazing that, I suppose, clover system, which also requires less nitrogen fertilizer to be spread as well. And I suppose if we remember from the last experiment, we're struggling to get that fat cover on those animals. But we can see in this experiment, those grass clover steers, we're getting them up to 630 kilo live weight at 19 months with no meal at finishing. And they were achieving, I suppose, a fat score of 3 minus. And if we look at our heifers, we're getting them up to nearly 600 kilo live weight, and they're getting a 308 kilo carcass and a fat score of 3 equals. So during their lifetime, they would have got 265 kilos of meal in total. That was fed from pre-weaning all the way through to the first winter, but they would have received no meal at finishing for the design of this experiment. So look, at the start of this talk, we did talk about reducing our costs on the farm and achieving good animal performance. And so what we can see that, I suppose, by using a good functional cow and using very good terminal sires, selecting for specific genetic traits that complement the system, then we can get that with very good grazing management and the inclusion of your clovers in the swards. Then we can get very good animal performance, and we can finish those animals, I suppose, at a young age, which is a very positive story. So I suppose, look, this slide here just shows you the level of finish that are on some of these animals. So our heifers, they averaged a 308 kilo carcass on that grass clover system. And all our Angus and all our Charolais heifers were all fit for slaughter. So they all have a fat score of 2+ or greater. And that just shows you that individual Charolais, she's a 3+ at 19 months, a fat score on a 324 kilo carcass. If we look at our steers, so our Angus steers, every single one of our Angus steers were finished off grass clover swards with no meal supplementation, except for one Angus bullock that was a 2 equals. So that's a very positive result. And within our Charolais bullocks, 70% of the Charolais bullocks were finished off a grass clover with no meal, and the 30% that weren't finished, there were 2 equals. So they're very close to finishing, and we didn't do it for the design of the study, but if we did introduce contract supplementation to those Charolais, we probably would have got them all over the line for fitness. So I suppose, look, in conclusion to that experiment, we can see that incorporating that white and red clover into that suckler calf to beef system, it increased our live weight gain by quite a considerable amount, and it also reduced our fertilizer nitrogen. So look, it's very much a very positive and win-win situation. And I suppose, look, the next steps in this study, look, we've only completed one production cycle of that calf to finish system. So we need to complete more production cycles, which we're currently doing at the moment. So look, more results will come available on this system over time. And we have Peter Bennett and Sarah Armstrong, they're measuring the cattle enteric meat production and the soil nitrate leaching and a lot of other measurements on these systems. So a lot of that data will become available when they're analysed and all collected. And we'll also have more data come available to help us do that sire breed comparison in another 2 years. And as well, we need to continue that, I suppose, analysis on the economic and environmental analysis each year. But I suppose, look, just before I finish up the presentation, I think it is probably important that the management of red clover is discussed. So I suppose, look, out there is a lot of variability across farms regarding the red clover persistence. I suppose, as we've seen in this presentation, like, there is a lot of very good advantages, but at the same time, it can be difficult to manage that red clover plant compared to grass silage. But it will typically last 4 to 6 years under favourable conditions, and probably a little bit less than that if it was unfavourable conditions. The main thing with your red clover is that you do have good soil fertility, and you avoid spreading excess nitrogen, because if you apply too much fertilizer nitrogen, that will dampen back your red clover proportions. But I suppose what maybe a lot of beef farmers might see is issues with compaction. So we try to avoid wet fields and compaction, because we see here, this is the growing point of the red clover. And with that, if that growing point gets damaged, then your whole plant can die. So we just need to be, I suppose, careful of selecting the right fields for that. Also, we need to be important to select the right varieties using the recommended lists from the UK. And with your red clover, like, it is a 3 to 4 cut silage system. It doesn't like grazing as much, but unfortunately it can be quite difficult in soil during bad weather. So although we typically cut it, say, in May, July and August or September, we don't do a silage cut on it in October. So we typically graze it once in October. And I suppose it is important whatever system you use, you try not to have a heavy cover on it going over the winter, because the red clover can get shaded out. So this here is an example of a picture that was taken in August 2024. It's a field that we have here in Grange. And I suppose what this story tells is that last autumn, we got to graze the top half of this field with cattle. But unfortunately, we got a lot of rain. As everyone remembers, it was a very bad wet autumn last year. And we didn't get to graze the bottom half of that field. And what happened was the bottom half of the field carried a heavy cover of grass over that winter time, and it wasn't cut until the first week of May. And essentially the clover got shaded out. So it just shows how one management decision can ultimately change the clover population in your field. Also, we have Sinead Carney. She's doing a PhD on red clover varieties. And through her work at the moment, the preliminary results, we can see that when you use good varieties in the UK recommended list, that you can get very good clover contents in the fields. However, there's some varieties, although they perform very well in other countries, they mightn't be as suited to, I suppose, in Irish climatic conditions, and some of those non-recommended varieties are not lasting as good. So it's important that you try to pick the best red clover varieties out there that are proven on the recommended lists. And I suppose, look, maybe just, I suppose, a talking point around clover is bloat will always come up as a discussion. So look, just for ourselves on Derry Patrick Farm, we didn't have any bloat incidents occurred during experiments 1 and 2. But I suppose in our systems, the animals are always on a grass clover diet for their life, so they're well acclimatized to clover. Whereas on a commercial farm basis, you'd be switching between grass clover and grass only swards. So just be mindful of preventing bloat. However, on our red clover fields, as I said, we could have up to 73% red clover content and grazing it in October, November, around this time of the year. So when I'm grazing those red clover fields, I do take an extra few management strategies to prevent bloat, such as bloat oil, 24-hour allocations, bit of fibre or hay in the diet, which is all helping to prevent those incidents in those high-risk fields. And regarding establishing clover, look, I suppose a lot of questions around it. There's probably less than 10% of bee farms receive an annual basis based on the National Farm Survey. So realistically speaking, oversown white clover will be the main establishment method. I suppose the details how to oversow clover, it's all in the conference proceedings booklet. It worked very well for us. Very happy with it. But you just need to follow the correct steps, that you have the right soil fertility. It's done in April and May, and the key thing is after sowing that you're keeping light coming down to this young clover plant and that's not getting shaded out. So I would like to thank everyone, for especially all the farm staff, technicians, technologists and students in Teagasc that would have helped with this study. And I suppose thanks people for listening. And look, if you don't get any questions in, we can answer them if you want to divert them to the email. So you can email myself, Peter Doyle, or the Walsh Scholar student, Peter Bennett, and we'd be delighted to answer any questions. And it's still an ongoing production cycle. So if anyone wants to come see in terms of group visits, we'd be delighted to have people.
Great, thanks, Peter. Okay, if you could stop sharing there now, Peter.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, that's really excellent, Peter. We see there some really impressive figures from, and we'll just go through a couple of questions. You were talking about steer. What stood out to me was, I know there were live weights, but you also gave carcass weight steers, 630 kilos finished off grass with no meal, apart from earlier in their life, 600 kilo heifers, similar age. So that's very impressive. What are you putting down, or what can you put down, Peter, to the extra performance of why are animals performing better on a clover sward and red clover than they are on the system without it? Or can you answer that?
Yes, so look, I suppose Pierce says we did measure intakes and herbage nutrient value, but look, that's still all been measured in the lab at the moment. We haven't got the results back yet. But if we look at Nicky Byrne's work for the red clover, what he's seen is that they had a higher intake on the red clover silage than the grass silage. Essentially, with that red clover, it's a different type of a fiber, and it's essentially has a faster passage rate in the animal, and that's driving those higher intakes. So you have to remember that if you want to, I suppose, use your red clover to increase your animal performance, you'll be using more silage. So just be careful that you have to grow more silage to be able to, I suppose, keep that high animal performance going.
And would you say it's something similar? Could it be something similar on the white clover? Are the animals eating more pasture?
Yes, that's what I suppose would be suggested based on the results in the dairy systems as well.
Okay, great. And 2024, was it a difficult year for white clover versus your 2023?
Absolutely, yeah. So it was a much, I suppose, it felt it was a much colder year, and I suppose a clover does like the heat, and that's needed for nitrogen fixation. So, you can see our, particularly on our red clover, the clover contents were back a little bit this year compared to previous years. And that probably did. You can see our yields for the red clover wasn't as good in 2024 as they were in 2023. So just shows you will have that year-to-year variation within those systems.
Okay, and just final question, Peter. I know you went through it very quick there at the end in terms of the incorporation. How did Grange, for the most part, incorporate white clover into their swards, or were they there all along?
Sorry, can you repeat that, please,
How
Pierce?
did you incorporate the white clover into your swards, Peter, in Grange?
Yeah, so look at with the white clover, we mainly oversow. It did work really well for us, but look, there is a smaller portion of fields that it won't work in. Um, so like it, as I said, April, May is the best time to do it. There were some years, you take cow silage, you'd cut it at the start of June, and we tried to oversow in those fields, say in the middle of June after silage cutting. But I suppose we were getting one or two dry summers, and that didn't really suit the oversowing of the clover. So it really is best suited, so say, to those grazing paddocks that are April, May, where you can get it done then. And if there's say one or two swards are really thick in the base, kind of like a sheep graze sward, and it's quite difficult for the light to get down to the base of the sward to those young clover plants. So for those fields, we prioritize to reseed for white clover, but the majority of the fields were able to successfully over. So particularly those grazing fields, if you do it in April and May.
Okay, listen, Peter, thanks a million for that, and thank
No
you
problem.
for giving that presentation, and thank you, the audience, for tuning in to look at this presentation. As I said at the start, full proceedings for all 6 papers that were presented at the Beef Conference are available on the website. We also have a recording of the other 5 presentations that were given at the Beef Conference. So if you want to go back, similar to see what this presentation here, if you want to go back and see any one of the other 5 presentations that were given in the evening, you can see a recording of that. With that, just to thank Peter once again for giving us the presentation. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Piers.